Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Prophetico, the Bands of Time, and our special guest. Hey, everybody, we got you there in the saddle.
You do indeed, Brian. You do indeed.
Hello, everybody.
Tonight we're going to have some discussions about all the events that goes in here to Judges chapter 9. Last time Brian and I talked about some of the intricate details, although not all. The other day, me and my son got to talking about the placement of things in here. And there's one thing that I did want to bring up. At first I wasn't going to, but I think this time I will bring up this one instance. Ladies and gentlemen, there are times when the count for 1,260, the royal count equals the exact count for the other side of the tribulation trigger. So this one calculation, the royal count means the 2,300 days, and the standard count equals that which is after the tribulation trigger, the 1,260 days, the 42 months, the times time and a half time. When you take a look, it is here in this chapter, of course, but I want you to realize something that really is off the charts. That in verse 23 it says this: then God sent out an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem, and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. That is a direct reference to Isaiah chapter 33 verse 1. Woe to you, O destroyer, while you were not destroyed, and he who is treacherous while others did not deal treacherously with him. As soon as you finish destroying, you will be destroyed, and as soon as you cease to deal treacherously, others will deal treacherously with you. Ladies and gentlemen, in that chapter, in verse 21, you get the same exact temporal integer, 1,260 days, that in its royal count equals 2,300. Now that sequence occurs in the scripture, the Masoretic text, exactly 26 times, or the number of the name of the Lord our God. So with that in mind, it's off the charts that we need to look at everything that happens here, because as Brian and I shared last time, the acts there clearly represented who God was going to use in the end times to do what he's going to do. And we brought up the simple fact there's two towers here. And my son and I got to talking about this the other day. Aaron, why don't you jump on here and share some of that discussion and your thoughts on this chapter? Just discuss it. You don't have to get technical if you don't want to, but share your thoughts about the events in this chapter and how you think it might line up with what is to come, and who possibly the entities involved will be.
Well, I opened up this chapter, and we were I've actually done something on this before, because this chapter has in it Zebul, who is who I have related to as Beelzebul himself, who's called the Prince of Demons, and his name, shortened Zebul, in this chapter. The way I see it, he must be this evil spirit that God set between Abimelech and the people with him. Why? Because Zebul, who is called Abimelech's lieutenant, he was the one who caused the strife between them to cause them to start killing each other for real. So that being said, out of any place. And we do know, if anything, this evil spirit in prophecy would be the devil himself. I'm not necessarily saying that Beelzebul is the devil, but a very important of his soldiers, as the devil is the chief of all demons. Anyway, so we have three parties. There is Abimelech, who was one of the sons of Jerubbaal, or that is Gideon. He was one of the sons of Gideon's from his concubine. He also had 70 sons. Gideon also had 70 sons. And see, our first party is Abimelech. And then the second party is Shechem. And Shechem is the place where he lives. And the people, they turn to him and make him their leader in place of his 70 brothers, as it seems that he and his brothers seem to rule the place at once. So the people of Shechem, they make a covenant with him in the place of Baal Berith, that is Baal of the covenant, and what part would Baal of the covenant be? He would probably be Azazel, but that's not really, he doesn't really play a very big part in here, so he's not one of these three parties. The people, they when they subject themselves to Abimelech, Abimelech just after they make him king at the house of Baal Berith, he goes and murders his 70 brothers on one stone, quote unquote. Except his youngest brother Jotham, he escaped, and he goes on a mountain and speaks against him. And this is what it says. When they told Jotham, this is Judges 9, verse 7, it says, when they told Jotham, he went and stood on the top of Mount Garizim, and lifted his voice and called out. Thus he said to them, listen to me, O men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. Once the trees went forth to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, shall I leave my flatness, with which God and men are honored, and go to wave over the trees? Then the tree said to the fig tree, you come reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to wave over the trees? Then the tree said to the vine, you come reign over us. But the vine said to them, shall I leave my new wine, which cheers God and man, and go and to wave over the trees? Finally, the tree said to the bramble, you come reign over us. The bramble said to the trees, if in truth you are anointing me as king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, make fire come out of the bramble and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Now, therefore, if you have dealt in truth and integrity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have dwelt with him as he deserved, for my father fought for you and risked his life and delivered you from the hands of Midian, but you have risen against my father's house today and have killed his 70 sons, 70 men on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his maidservant, king over the men of Shechem, because he is your relative. If you have dealt in truth and integrity with Jerubbaal and his house this day, rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech and consume the men of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from the men of Shechem and from Beth Millo, and consume Abimelech. Then Jotham escaped and fled and went to Beer, and remained there because of his brother Abimelech. Okay, so after this, God literally starts fulfilling his parable because he sends this evil spirit between them, which I believe is Zebul himself. Well, so that's what brings in our third party. See, there's Abimelech, Shechem. They should be in the same party, right? Because they just made a pact with them. Well, the third party, that's who is Zebul. This third party is what separates these two other parties. Why? Because they were never going to deal well with each other. Why? Because that's the way that God always meant it. Because Abimelech was a murderer. He murdered his brothers, and the men of Shechem allowed it. So the wrath of God is brought out in this way. But notice that neither of these three parties are good ones. All three of them are evil. It even says that the spirit that God sent on them, he was an evil spirit himself. It doesn't say he was a special good spirit. It doesn't say he was an angel. This was an evil spirit. It was a demon. So none of these three were ever good. And pretty much what we're seeing here is evil killing evil on all three sides, all three angles. So, and, well, who will this evil spirit be in the future? Well, this must be Satan himself, who is called Leviathan. And we'll look at Isaiah 27 verse 1. And here it says in NASB, "In that day the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, and with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he will kill the dragon who lives in the sea." Okay, it says Leviathan, it names him a serpent twice in here. It says Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, and Leviathan, the twisted serpent. So as many in the past have actually indicated themselves, there are two here. So Leviathan pretty much means a writhing dragon. So here when he's called a twisted serpent, it could mean crooked, and that word twisted is akalathon in Hebrew, and it says, so that would be Leviathan akalathon nachash, and that means Leviathan, the twisted serpent. And the way I see it, akalathon is only an alternation of the word Leviathan. Leviathan meaning writhing serpent. Akalathon would mean akal, the bending or twisting, than, dragon. So this is the second Leviathan. The first Leviathan being the fleeing one, and the second one being the twisting one, and that is akalathon. Anyway, according to scripture, which one would be which? And I actually looked into it, and it's pretty surprising. The fleeing serpent, fleeing literally means to be a fugitive. This fugitive one is talked about in Jeremiah 4-21, and interestingly enough, it leads us straight in the right direction, as having to do with this fight between people that own their own congregation. And here's what it says. In the Septuagint, I will turn to the Septuagint. It says, "I am," starting from verse 19 of Jeremiah 4. I'll start reading. "I am pained in my bowels in the sensitive parts of my heart. My soul is in great commotion. My heart is torn. I will not be silent, for my soul has heard the sound of a trumpet." Who would this trumpet be? Well, the trumpet of an archangel, if we look in the New Testament. The cry of war and distress, and it calls destruction. So this is one of the 7 trumpets of Revelation, we must assume. For all the land is distressed. Suddenly, my tabernacle is distressed. My curtains have been rent asunder. There's some sort of fight there's something that has occurred in the temple. However, the curtains being rent asunder, that has to do with the death of Christ. When Christ died, the temple curtain was torn. So, this land must be distressed for the reason of Christ. Now to verse 21. How long shall I see fugitives? This being the fleeing serpent in this hypothesis, and hear the sound of the trumpet. For the princes of my people, the archons, have not known me. They are foolish and unwise children. They are wise to do evil, but how to do good they have not known. I have looked upon the earth, and behold, it was not, into the sky, and there was no light in it. I beheld the mountains, and they trembled, and I saw the hills in commotion. I looked, and behold, there was no man, and all the birds of the skies was scared. I saw, and behold, the Carmel was a desert, and all the cities were burnt with fire in the presence of the Lord, and at the presence of his fierce anger they were utterly destroyed. Thus saith the Lord, the whole land shall be desolate, but I will not make a full end. For these things let the earth mourn, and let the sky be dark above. For I have spoken, and I will not repent. I have purposed, I have proposed, and I will not turn back from it. The whole land has recoiled from the noise of the horsemen and the bent bow. This must be the riders from the river Euphrates. They have gone into caves. They have hidden themselves in the groves, and have gone up upon rocks. Every city was scared. No man dwelt in them. But what wilt thou do? Though thou clothe thyself with scarlet, adorn thyself with golden ornaments, and adorn thy eyes with stibinium, thy beauty will be in vain. Thy lovers, here's the verse, thy lovers have rejected thee, they seek thy life. For I have heard thy groaning as the voice of a woman in travail, as of her that brings forth her first child. And the voice of the daughter Zion shall fail through weakness. She shall lose the strength of her hand. Woe is me, for my soul faints because of the slain. Okay, so here is exactly what we're talking about. Verse 30, it says, thy lovers have rejected thee. They seek thy life. This is the friction between these two places and these two parties. These people hiding themselves, they're running from the horsemen and the bent bow. These horsemen must be those who have sided with the Assyrian, his soldiers. And this is quite shocking. Actually, from translating the book of Enoch myself, it talks about how Azazel, who is Azazel, who's trapped in the abyss now and is their leader, will be the beast of the apocalypse. He taught people to adorn their eyes with stibinium, which is basically a metal that in Egypt they put on their eyes for beauty, which is interesting enough that it is mentioned in verse 30. Though thou clothe thyself with scarlet and adorn thyself with golden ornaments, though thou adorn thy eyes with stibinium, thy beauty is in vain. Okay, so you make yourself all beautiful, do everything you can to make yourself look good to the beast who comes out of the abyss, but it's in vain because he will reject you. This is the friction. Okay, now however, this this fleeing serpent, this is the devil. And so he's going to be cowering in this big thing because he's not in the fight. He just made the fight. He just brought the fight together. And we go to Judges 9 again. And Zebul, I will read how he brings everybody against each other because, and it's going to raise a few eyebrows here. It says, so let me start reading from Judges 9, verse 22, and from the Brenton's translation of the Septuagint. And Abimelech reigned over Israel 3 years, and God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Sikma. And the men of Sikma, or Shechem, dealt treacherously with the house of Abimelech, to bring the injury done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, and to lay their blood upon their brother Abimelech, who slew them, and upon the men of Shechem, because they strengthened their hands to slay his brethren. This meaning of laying the blood on their hands is talked all about in the New Testament, all about in Revelation. This is when God avenges those martyrs, those who were murdered by the ungodly. And the men of Shechem sent liars in wait against him on the top of the mountains, and robbed everyone who passed by them on the way. And it was reported to King Abimelech. And Gaal, son of Jobel, came and his brethren, and passed by Shechem. And the men of Shechem trusted in him. And they went out into the field, gathered their grapes, trod them, and made merry, and they brought the grapes into the house of their god. Who's this god? This is Baal Berith. See, Abimelech and Gaal are worshiping the same god. And they ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. And Gaal, the son of Jobel, said, "Who is Abimelech, and who is the son of Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and is not Zebul his steward, his servant, with the son of Amor, the father of Shechem? Why should we serve him? And this people were under my hand? Then would I remove Abimelech, and I would say to him, multiply thy host and come out." Then Zebul, the ruler of the city, he is a ruler here as well, as he is a ruler of demons. He is also the ruler of the city. Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, son of Jobel, and he was very angry. And he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, "Behold, Gaal, the son of Jobel, and his brethren are come to Shechem, and behold, they have besieged the city against thee. And now rise up by night, and thou and the people with thee, and lay in the field. And it will come to pass in the morning at sunrising, thou shalt come up and draw towards the city, and behold, he and the people with him will come forth against thee, and thou shalt do to him according to thy power." He lied. See, he poses as on the side of Abimelech, but his rage blinded him to lie. He lies to his own leader, Abimelech, the one who he serves. So, he's pretty much making war. Gaal was drunk, and he said a bunch of things, but he had obviously no intention of actually attacking people. This was Zebul's idea. And so Abimelech and all the people with him rose up by night and formed an ambuscade against Shechem in 4 companies. And Gaal, the son of Jobel, went forth and stood by the door of the gate of the city. And Abimelech and the people with him arose from the ambuscade. And Gaal, the son of Jobel, saw the people and said to Zebul, "Behold, the people comes up from the top of the mountains." And Zebul said to him, "Thou seest the shadows of the mountains as men." See, he lies here too. But Gaal continued to speak and said, "Behold, a people comes from down westward from the part bordering on the middle of the land, and another company comes from the way of Helon Moanim. And Zebul said to him, And where is thy mouth that thou spokest? Who is Abimelech that we should serve him? Is not this people whom thou despisest? Go forth now and set the battle in array against him. And Gaal went forth before the men of Shechem, and set the battle in array against Abimelech. And Abimelech pursued him, and he fled before him, and many fell down, slain as far as the door of the gate. And Abimelech entered into Arumah, and Zebul cast out Gaal and his brethren, so that they would not dwell in Shechem. So this brings war. This, from here on, Abimelech's just killing everybody. So he even goes up against his own god. When everybody gathers into the temple of Baal-berith, he burns it down with everybody in it. And that just is quite kind of shocking. That, yeah, how you see that he even turns against his own god, whom in his house, in his temple, he was anointed king. It was in his house that he was given money to murder his brother, 70 shekels. This is so the devil literally sets himself up between these two parties and caused them to fight, but Zebul really isn't part of the battle whatsoever. And so as I was talking about here, that it's we see the Assyrian and the men who have been with him are just tearing apart from each other and fighting, and their lord Azazel, he doesn't really seem to be part of it. However, it even says that the men of Shechem gather themselves in a strong tower in verse 51. When they try to escape from Abimelech, they all go into this strong tower. That word strong is as, same part of the name Azazel. So pretty much prophetically, all the people are trying to save themselves with Azazel from here. And actually, that's when a woman throws a millstone over the top of the building and smashes Abimelech in the head. And Abimelech asks his one of the people with him to kill him, so he didn't have to die by a woman. So this is as far as I have to say. I mean, it's mind-boggling what I've got here. I've got a lot more verses proving, how the crooked serpent has to be Azazel. Why? Because Job 4:18 refers to that word crooked serpent from the Greek. It says, against God's angels, he charges error or corruption, crookedness. This must be Azazel, the part of Azazel. And Hosea 9:8 actually contains this word as well, and the word mastema, which I would like to bring up. It says, Ephraim was a watchman with my God, a prophet, yet the snare of a birdcatcher in all his ways, and there is hostility in the house of God. This word hostility is mastema, rooting from the word Satan. Mastema also is the lead antagonist and ruler of demons in the book of Jubilees, which I thought I'd point out. So, looking at it this way, let me translate this. Ephraim was a watchman with my God, and a prophet, I guess must be the Assyrian, shall snare, yet the snare of a bird catcher in all his ways. So, he's a, so, we can tell from here that he is just a snare. That's in Septuagint actually says snare. He's waiting to trap people with the way he does things, and has established the devil in the house of his God. He has established Zebul in the house of Balberith, in the house of Azazel. So, if I were to connect this to anything else in anything in prophecy, it talks about in Daniel how the one horn will, with eyes and a mouth, shall come up from the 10 horns and uproot 3 of them.
Well, Aaron, you're exactly correct, son. Not only that, it says that he is able to trample down the host of heaven, which you just read. What you just read was the perfect detail of how he's able to do that. God came right out and told you that this false prophet is a bird catcher, literally speaking. So we've always known this, that the false prophet, he's something different. He can actually trample down the host of heaven. But of course we see this with Zebul as an exact representation to what is to come with Satan, because what's the first thing he does? The very first thing he does is he puts his hands behind his back and gives all his authority to, of course, the scapegoat, and steps back. So, Brian, you need to jump in here because you haven't said diddly squat yet. I don't think that's right. Brian, jump in here and knock some of this out.
One little tidbit I wanted to touch on, because you made this full well apparent as you pointed out that name of that other entity, Baal-bereth. Now, I'm sure folks out there, you have all these varied study tools that go through and tell you the entire list of Satan and all his names. And they try to tell you that each and every one of these is his name. It has gotten so thoroughly confusing. And this ties back around to where you point out there's 2 serpents listed. That's kind of the key on top of it, understanding why Ezekiel 38, why Ezekiel 39 are flipped. Because that serpent, that hook in the jaw that transpires in 38, that's referring to the great dragon. And I've seen people get confused by this one. Everybody has always got this mentality of running around naming every one of these little names as being Satan. For instance, they want to say that word that's used typically in Isaiah 14, Lucifer, that they took to the Latin, well, that's Satan. No, it's not. That chapter was never about that, but everybody's entered that in because, well, that term Lucifer, but they haven't looked at the Greek, nor have they looked at the Hebrew to put 2 and 2 together of who is who. I have so many conversations that come up where I'm asked, well, how are events going to transpire? Because, you've got this whole quote-unquote Antichrist figure that they've come up straight from the script of the Omen. And, they throw in all these other twistings that happened during the Middle Ages with your varied books, Dante's Inferno, Paradise Lost. So much so now that nobody seems to put 2 and 2 together of exactly what they just pointed out, that when those angels and when the great dragon himself are cast down, it is so crucially important that you understand he hands his authority over to the beast. It does not say anywhere, not anywhere, that this is Satan the entire time, but this misconception has become so deeply embedded in everybody's thought forms that it causes them not to see clearly. And
And that's why the beast is also called Leviathan. He's called the crooked serpent because he has been given the authority of the dragon, the original Leviathan. He's only called Leviathan because the original Leviathan has offered him that place. That's why he's called a dragon, because he has his 7 heads now that Satan has offered that authority to him.
well, and exactly, and there's not many people that even comprehend what it's stating there in Revelation in the book of Daniel. Now they want to turn those heads. They get confused when it comes in and says, well, these heads are kings, this mountain, etc., etc., etc. All the way through the Bible, you should already recognize beyond any shadow of a doubt when you see that word head, that is referring to only one thing. That is one of the angelic host. When you see the terminology used, horn, that is always telling you it always represents a king. Okay, go into, look at Zechariah and multiple chapters that tie in there with the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. It talks about the 4 horns that sent into captivity. Okay, why does it keep using the same terminology? Why do we keep getting heads? And just like Aaron just said, you got one, you got the accuser. I tend to, when I'm speaking to people around here, I don't use that term Satan in discussion and they just look at me. I always state the accuser, and there's a reason for that. It's due to this fact that everybody has confused Satan with every single other entity that's mentioned anywhere in the Bible. I mean, for Pete's sakes, they'll go through and tell you where they were worshiping the Ashtaroth, and it gets crazy. And it's just, episodes like this is where we have to drill home and get everybody to understand the reality of what the Bible says as opposed to the mythology that's come along throughout the ages, entering the Middle Ages. Then we've put movie plots somehow into our understanding of end-time prophecy. And look, folks, these things have to stop.
I would like to point out that in Revelation 17 verse 10, some of these 10 kings, it talks about 5 specifically that fell. It says 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. But these 5 specifically, as I've looked in, I have a little experience from the book of Enoch, and it talks about a certain 5, which have been concluded as the 5 Satans. They led the host of heaven astray, according to the book of Enoch. So there seem to be 5 of the soldiers of Satan. One of 5 of these 7, I guess they've gone down into the abyss, because I just thought I'd point that out from my studies.
He's referring, of course, to the Balisos, Aaron. And of course, there is a lot about that to discuss as far as end-time entities, because that's a Leviathan. Of course, it's you can find it in the old text, mythological creatures. This particular type of Leviathan. So we've talked about that before, but yes, ladies and gentlemen, and it was supposed to be the king because it had a crown. This particular beast had a crown, but absolutely off the charts as far as tying in with the mythologies there. But if you just take a read here, ladies and gentlemen, in Revelation chapter 17, Well, ladies and gentlemen, you see exactly what happens here. Um, it's amazing to me that what happens is exactly what happened to the people at Shechem. Of course, it says that these 10 kings, uh, what they do, they make her desolate. Remember what happened to Shechem. They sowed it with salt. Burn her with fire. Exactly what it's talking about here. An exact representation of what happened. Uh, Absolutely amazing, the descriptions, the correlations going on here. So we have everything in this chapter, really, Judges chapter 9. It has everything in it. It's right there. And as Aaron brought out there in verse 51, of course, it is the root for the scapegoat there, Oz, which begins the sequence of integers that equal 1,290. You're supposed to know that. It literally says in our tongue, it says, strong become within the city. It starts after the Hebrew word Megiddo, tower. So it's important that you see that of course the second tower mentioned is exactly what's going to happen to you at the end of the 1,290 days as the tribulation trigger is tripped, ladies and gentlemen. The place of Thebez, this tower of Thebez, of course, here stating to you out in the open, if you could see it in the Hebrew, this tower was protection from Oz. Can only be a direct reference to one entity. You're supposed to know at the end of this 1,290 days. That's when the tribulation trigger is, and you're going to be taken to the tabernacle of David for 1,260 days. You should know that. As everything comes flying apart at the seams, it's then from your place, from Thebez, you're going to witness the first part, just like Jesus said in Matthew 24. This is going to happen. But he's promised you that right before the beast comes for you, you're taken and put into the white tower of Thebez. And you'll take note, ladies and gentlemen, that one woman, she is the reason that the Lord Jesus Christ comes back and puts a period at the end of this sentence. You're supposed to be able to look at this and realize that this is an exact representation of what's to come. I mean, perfectly. It's here in every which way you can. It's here. He's pointed out to you in so many ways. I mean, this is a perfect representation. I mean, just like what I just read out of Revelation chapter 19. It's exactly the same. And I'm glad that both Brian and Aaron brought up the simple fact that, look, you need to know what you're dealing with. You need to know what you're dealing with. There's two dragons. One is the dragon. He's always been the dragon. But the book of Revelation tells you quite plainly that he doesn't do anything. That's why he does not go into the lake of fire. He hands his authority over to the scapegoat. That's what he does. So when Christ gets back, it's Satan and Satan alone that gets thrown into the holding tank. He gets thrown into Tartarus. He gets thrown into the abyss. It's just him in that abyss. Just like the part that Zebul played here in Judges chapter 9, he does the exact same thing. He does the exact same thing between the Assyrian and the 10 kings. It's this sort of treachery, which is, of course, why I told you that that reference in verse 23 to the treacherous, that's a direct reference to Isaiah chapter 33, verse 1. In both instances, ladies and gentlemen, you have the duration for this entire thing. There in those verses, 1,260 in the royal count is 2,300. You're supposed to know what that is. You're supposed to know what's to come. Just so everybody knows, the 26 times that God does this after the number of his name, I know it's going to sound amazing to you, but he never repeats himself. 26 different times he uses the perfect combination of 1,260 so that in its royal count it equals 2,300. And it's absolutely perfect, is what it is. Yes, Aaron, you wanted to interject something?
I wanted to point out how you were talking about with how Satan's he doesn't do anything but hands his authority over to the scapegoat. Well, in that way, that must be why he's called the fleeing serpent, because he's just gonna stand back here. He's gonna be a coward. He's just gonna make the other guy do it. And of course he knows Azazel's going to do it. Azazel has already made himself subject to him before, and now he's literally just said to Azazel, I'll be subject to you because I'm giving you my authority. And we know that Satan must be one of the, if not the highest authority of angels on earth, because he's the prince of the power of the air, the atmosphere. I would like to point that out.
Well, Aaron, exactamundo. Okay? So you see here who the scapegoat is, right, ladies and gentlemen? Aaron was pretty clear to make sure that you understood that Zebul in this instance is the devil, is the dragon. It says that he got mad and sent word to Abimelech, and then he sat there and lied to the antagonist and dumped all the blame on him, and then he sat there and watched the two slaughter each other. You didn't catch that, did you, ladies and gentlemen? Zebul got away with this. You didn't realize that? Yeah, Zebul got away with all of this. He didn't actually do anything. The only thing he did was lied, and he deceived by way of letting the men get close enough to attack. Okay, that's what happened. See, when God saw the people, he said to Zebul, look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains. But Zebul said to him, no, you're seeing the shadow of the mountains as if they were men. Sat there and lied to him until Abimelech got close enough, and then the two forces collided. But ladies and gentlemen, Zebul didn't do anything. So this is a perfect representation. Now, just take note. Just take note. It's clearly defined here which group in this story are the kings from the east. You caught it, didn't you? The group traveling was this Gaal. Remember? They're the ones that transversed any difference, and they come just to party hardy. Remember? They gathered their grapes, they trotted the wine press, made wine, and That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, God uses them in this Advent to do what he's going to do. So it's literally all right here. It's literally all right here, what is to come. Brian, did you have anything else you want to jump in here and add?
I was just looking through this here. I mean, it's kind of crucial, especially where it comes in. I mean, let's see. Where was it at? We got that in the 1335, but it's specifically here in the 1290, folks. And I mean, this is before. Okay, this is leading up to the trigger being tripped. You know, we have here Judges 9, verse 14. And if assuming, let's see, double check to make sure I got that. Then said all the trees to the bramble, come you and reign over me. And when you pop it over here and look at some other spots where the trees come up specifically, in Ezekiel 31 was the one main verse that automatically stuck out in my head. I mean, it should stick out in everybody else's. A relation unto the Pharaoh. And it came to pass in the 11th year in the 3rd month, in the 1st day of that month, that the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to all his multitude. Whom are you like in greatness? Behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon, with fair branches, and with a shadowing shroud, and of high stature, and his top was among the thick boughs. The waters made him great, the deep set him up on high, with her rivers running around about his plants, and sent her little rivers to all the trees of the field. Therefore his height was exalted above all the trees of the field, and his boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long, because of the multitude of waters when he shot forth. All the fowls of the heavens made their nests in his boughs, and under his branches did all the beasts of the field bring forth their young, and under his shadow dwelled all great nations. Thus he was fair in his greatness, in his length of his branches, for his root was great by waters. The cedar in the garden of God could not hide him. The fir trees were not like his boughs, and the chestnut trees were not like his branches, nor any tree in the garden of God was like to him in his beauty. I have made him fair by the multitude of his branches, so that all the trees of Eden that were in the garden of God envied him. Therefore thus saith the Lord God, because you have lifted up yourself in height, and he is shot, I have therefore delivered him into the hand of the mighty one of the heathen. He shall surely deal with him. I have driven him out of for his wickedness, and strangers, the terrible of the nations, have cut him off, and have left him on the mountains, and in the valleys his branches are fallen, and his boughs are broken by all the rivers of the land. And all the people of the earth are gone down from his shadow, and have left him. On his ruin shall all the fowl of the heaven remain, and all the beasts of the field shall be on his branches, to the end that none of all the trees by the waters exalt themselves for the height, neither shoot up in their top among the thick boughs, neither their trees stand up in their height, all that drink water, for they are delivered to death, to the nether parts of the earth, in the middle of the children of men, with them that go down to the pit. Thus says the Lord God, in that day when he went down to the grave, I caused a mourning. I covered the deep for him, and I restrained the floods thereof, and the great waters were stayed. And I caused Lebanon to mourn for him, and all the trees of the field fainted for him. I made the nations shake at the sound of his fall, when I cast him down to hell with them that descended into the pit. And all the trees of Eden, the choice best of Lebanon, all that drink water, shall be comforted in the nether parts of the earth. They also went down into hell with him to them that be slain with the sword, and they that were his arm, that dwelled under his shadow in the middle of the heathen. To whom are you thus like glory and in greatness among the trees of Eden? Yet shall you be brought down with the trees of Eden to the nether parts of the earth. You shall lie in the middle of the uncircumcised with them that be slain by the sword. This is Pharaoh and all his multitude, said the Lord God. When you have this parable of the trees back there in Judges, it becomes apparent that there's a multitude of places that your mind should already be seeing. Okay, and this verse, this chapter in Ezekiel 31 should stand out like a sore thumb, because it gives you the entire course of events before the trigger, after the trigger, and then what? When the false prophet is cast into the pit.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to realize this, that verse 11 was in reference to the flail of God. Verse 11 was in reference to the scourge of God. You have to realize what he just said. This was a perfect description of the false prophet, the Assyrian. It said that those 70 princes got jealous of him. He extenuated his power over them. And because of all this, they got jealous. But it says here in the New American Standard Version, let me read it for you. Therefore I will give it into the hand of a despot of the nations. He will thoroughly deal with it according to its wickedness. I have driven it away. Alien tyrants of the nations have cut down and left it on the mountains, and in all the valleys its branches have fallen, and its boughs have been broken in all the ravines, in all the land, and all the peoples of the earth have gone down from its shade and left it. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a perfect description of what God said he's going to do with the false prophet's host.
And
That's
the verse in Judges 9 verse 15, it indicates straight out that it is talking about the same concept, because it says, the bramble said to the trees, if in truth you are anointing me as king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, may fire come out from the bramble and consume the cedars of Lebanon. So the cedars of Lebanon is talked here about the Assyrian as well. So what Brian said is confirmed by just this verse 15 from chapter 9. It is talking about in prophetic in prophetic ways. It's from a prophetic point of view, Judges 15 and this whole chapter is talking about this prophecy, and it's amazing.
It's absolutely amazing. And just take note, like I said, everybody, who he comes after is not mentioned here. Children are not mentioned in this chapter. It says 1,000 men and women, of course meaning the entire city, but God wanted to make sure he didn't say that. Because like I said before, 144 integers not in this chapter, not period. So you're supposed to know by inference that's who he's coming after. Because you have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that the 70 are well aware of the conception, the inception of the Emmanuel prophecy of Isaiah chapter 7 and 8. They know what's going down. And as you can see, what's going on here, it all makes perfect sense through shadow and silhouette of Judges chapter 9. It's absolutely amazing, like I shared in the last broadcast. Ladies and gentlemen, go over to prophetico.net and look at all those schematics that I made up for everybody. It's mind-blowing. All the temporal integers are in this chapter all over it. It's absolutely phenomenal. But as Brian read that, if you had eyes that can see and ears that can hear, he just told you exactly what was going on. I mean, how he even used the word ayil. Of course, here, the New American Standard Bible said, despot of the nations. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand a sequence of events that Brian and I have went to great lengths to explain to you. That the Assyrian will spread his wings and he'll cross the great river. When he does, that river dries up. And God will call upon the despot of the nations. His scourge, his flail. And he's going to bring them all because the Lord says, kings of the east. So we have no idea. Ladies and gentlemen, if you thought that Attila the Hun was bad, just imagine there's going to be 4 companies. And each one of those, oh my goodness, ladies and gentlemen, if you thought Genghis Khan was bad, imagine if Attila was riding in the horse right next to him and flanking them to the left and to the right was 2 that we haven't even conceived of yet. They're coming. And they're coming because God said this. He takes his axe, he uses his axe, but then the people of the axe are wiped out. That's what he said. That's why this Euphrates River is so important when it dries up. You're supposed to understand. You're supposed to already know all of these prophecies up front. Exactly what the Assyrian's going to do. Exactly who he's coming after. Exactly why the 70 come and do what they do. Just exactly what the prophecy in Ezekiel said. Now you understand why the book of Daniel says such strange things, that how can this man throw down the host of heaven? How can he have authority over them? It was just explained to you in great detail. It went on to state, of course, a great jealousy that they had. Everyone was jealous of him once they had appointed him. Ladies and gentlemen, it's all here. All the details are right here. We just covered it. You're given a key integer as to why in Daniel chapter 11, of course, it tells you right outright who the 3 horns are that the Assyrian rips out by the roots. But at the end of this prophecy, you're given a hint and shadow of what the king of the south is going to do. Perhaps he is the one that calls upon the kings of the east. I don't know. I do know that Egypt is mentioned at the end of this, and that's kind of what happens exactly in Daniel chapter 11. It says the same thing. Bri, jump in here. Give me a break. Or even Aaron. Maybe Aaron can touch that a little bit about this mechanical thing as to why God says that once the Assyrian spreads his wings across the river, it dries up. There's these 4 angels bound there. Can you speak to that, Aaron, or Brian, if he would like to? But I need a break.
Okay. Should there come a flood, he would not regard it. He is confident the Jordan can roll into his mouth. In the NASB, it says, he is confident though the Jordan rushes to his mouth. This is speaking of the behemoth, some sort of a land monster, talked about in Job 40. What party this behemoth is from, I'm not sure. But the Jordan rushing to his mouth makes me wonder. So we've talked before about some one of the missing rivers of Eden, one of the 4. One of them may have been a connection of the Jordan River, the Dead Sea, and the Red Sea all combined into one. And so this second river, if I could assume anything, who'd be the one calling these demonic entities? This must be the behemoth. If I were to say who the behemoth is, it says that he is first in the ways of God. In verse 19 of Job 40, it says he's in the first in the ways of God. Let his maker bring near his sword. Well, if I were to say anything, it's our Exodus angel, the one who is talked about in the books of Moses, is talked about as not having to forgive the sins of the people if they do wrong. He is the one with the name of God in his name, the angel of Yahweh, or YHVH. He actually contains the name of God in him. So if I were to say anything, who would call these soldiers, it would actually be somebody from the good side. And as we can see, as I read before about the people being horrified about horsemen with bows, they are. This indicates that these riders are the ones who stayed with King Abimelech. They're not the people of Shechem. They're the people who are fighting for Abimelech. And in Judges 9, verse 34, it says, the people with Abimelech divided into 4 companies against the people of Shechem. And that's how he got them. That's how he attacked Gaal and these people and got them off guard. These 4 companies, they must be these 4 angels. They've come out of the Euphrates, upon its drying up, I guess. And there's something that goes on that finally, somehow, they have made a covenant with Azazel to stop killing people. Let me rephrase that. This is at the point where these writers are going to destroy 1/3 of the population, I guess, and the Assyrians actually at their head, under the authority of Azazel. But as we can see, he's kind of fighting for his own at this point, and Azazel's kind of sitting back. Got anything to say, Bri?
Yep, I definitely do. You pointed out the bows. Okay, we've emphatically, folks, we've spoken of these kings of the East and their bows. Okay, and as Aaron just brought up, you got the angels that are coming up with the Euphrates. But I kind of want to hit the rewind button on top of it as well. And even, we can even bring this back into clarity with what was going on there in Ezekiel 31. We talked quite extensively about that word fowls and what's going on with those people of the East and the people that, they dress up like that eagle vulture. Okay, so now we have a correlation with who could be these people of the East that have done just what Aaron described. And I can see,
Right.
Matthew, you want to kick in.
Well, Aaron read it to you. God himself said that this false prophet would have the ability to be a bird catcher. You brought out the historical archaeological evidence that is how they were possibly communicating with the kings of the East from said location. That's how they span that great big distance. Aaron read it for you. You've already been told, ladies and gentlemen. Aaron read it. This prophet's a bird catcher. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian went through laborious work putting together the show notes for that, making sure that you could be able to go to those sites and see, okay, that they were putting on these shamans, I guess, is the best word for it. They were communicating back and forth. Now, I just wanted to say that, and let me add one more thing here, because everybody needs to hear this. Because Brian brought it to all of our attention. Okay, you have to understand that east is going to be north. Listen to what it says in Daniel. I've mentioned this twice already, but just let me add in this, and then I'll shut up, I promise. Daniel chapter 11 and verse 43. But he will gain control over the hidden treasures, gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. The Libyans and the Ethiopians will follow at his heels. But rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you should know what was said right before that. What happens right before this event? You're told exactly what happens here. So I mentioned Egypt, starting in verse 40, but I want to read that part first. It said from the north and from the east. But this is what it says when we back up to verse 40. At the end of time, the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots, with horsemen, with many ships, and he will enter the countries and overflow them and pass through. He will also enter into the beautiful land. Many countries will fall, but these he will rescue out of his hand, Edom and Moab and the foremost sons of Ammon. Then he will stretch out his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. This is the Assyrian. Kings of the east ain't got involved yet. I'll read it again. I'll read 42 and 43 again. Then he will stretch out his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. But he will gain control of the hidden treasures, gold and silver, as I stated. Verse 44. But rumors from the east and the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch his tents, his royal pavilion, between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to an end. No one will help him. Ladies and gentlemen, this just used the exact same verbiage that Brian used to tell you that, ladies and gentlemen, this is when God gets mad, steps in the middle of it, because he comes after those children. Kicks us off our axis, and then the kings from the east come because he's crossed the river and it's dried up. Now, I mean, how many times do I have to say it? How many different chapters, how many different verses does God have to use to explain it to you? The Assyrians' host gets killed because God takes vengeance on him for doing this. He sends the kings of the east, which, once we go back to the days of Noah, ladies and gentlemen, they're going to be from the north. Look at the map. Brian and I have provided for you multiple times the exact coordinates for Noah's North Pole. Look at that, and then look at where they're coming from, and it'll rattle your cage. That's what he just said. And like I said, at the end of what Brian read in Ezekiel 31, now you know why Egypt would want to communicate with them, because it didn't say that the Assyrian looted anybody else. Let me read it one more time. But he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver and of all the precious things of Egypt. Why didn't he do that to all the other countries he overflowed like a flood? Anyway, that's it for me. I promise I will shut up. But I'm just mind boggled as to how many verses, how many chapters do you need, ladies and gentlemen, to prepare yourself for what is to come? Aaron?
Well, to add on to what you said, Revelation 18, verse 2, it says, and he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. So, yeah, birdcatcher.
I alluded to something last night in the broadcast that we did on the Queen of Babylon. I pointed out that when you come across new data and have to reconsider something fresh, you're going to have to reevaluate the picture as a whole. Now, I want everybody to stop and think. We talked about over and over and over again, when God gets ticked off and he comes down and he kicks us off our axis and puts us back to the days of Noah. But that's the primary key. All right, we know from Ezekiel 38 that Israel, that Jerusalem, that Temple Mount is at the center. It's at the navel of the earth. Once again, that's why it's important to understand the course of events there. Ezekiel 38 is the second event. Ezekiel 39 is the first. But we know emphatically that at that point before the flood, that Jerusalem was the center. Because if we're going back, well, it's going to put its placement there. Now, we've spoken considerably. Eden's come up how many times here tonight? Everybody, are we so certain that Eden is where all these people have been telling us? Or have we been misled into looking at the wrong place because of one river being thrown out of sync? Now, if the earth was sitting straight up and down on its axis before the flood happened at the days of Noah, okay, I remember what was just pointed out. Our east is going to be north. One river, in and of itself, it has been translated numerous times as to being by quote-unquote Cush or Ethiopia, but the problem is you have to actually understand the Greek term that's used there, and on top of it realize where that Greek term came from. That Greek term is not referring to the Ethiopia, which is today's modern Ethiopia. I'm sorry, folks, it's not. Why? Because that landmass was not there. That exact Greek term is used in Herodotus, where he speaks about the people of Ethiopia. Okay, who were these folks? The people that are referred to in this really interesting riddle and parable that comes up when Cambius goes to seek out the gold from the king of Ethiopia, it tells you something in there. He makes fun of the food that they're eating because basically they eat stuff that just comes up from the ground. They bring up stuff. They eat things that are grown from the ground. But they go on to say that this king laughs at him and goes, you know, we're long lived, about 120 years. Our diet consists of boiled meat and milk. Now, I'm sorry, folks, if you like this or not, I don't really care. I'm giving you the facts. There is only one place in the entirety of the world where the people eat boiled meat and drink milk. And that's in the steppe regions. That's in Central Asia. Okay, specifically, you can go in and bring up the Cossack diet, which is the diet of the Scythian. A lot of those Scythian inhabit Kazakhstan. What did they eat? Boiled meat and milk. They did not eat things grown from the earth because guess what? Anytime that the pasture lands would dry up, they would have to move so that their animals could eat again. They could not take and eat of the field. They could not take and eat that stuff. There's just no way. So they had to survive off of boiled meat and the milk from their animals that they produced and the meat from the animals that they produced. So right there, Herodotus had encoded from this visit of Cambius as he's going to get this gold. You're being told, look at the steppes. Now that is the exact Greek word for Ethiopia that is used right there in the Septuagint. It's the exact same word that Herodotus uses, but you have to realize that when he's speaking of Libya and Herodotus and his way of seeing geography, he was speaking of the ancient Libyans and the 3 geographical locations in which they lived. Who were these ancient Libyans who he was referring to? They were tall, around 6 foot to 6'5", long blonde hair, and blue eyes. Okay, you can go back and look in any of the ancient historical documentation and find out that what I just said is the absolute truth of the matter. So when Herodotus was referring to Libya, he was referring to 3 geographical locations. Okay, this has been documented since the 1800s. There's been people that have sat down, this is in a plethora of books from that period, where they sat down and looked at this and said, you have the Asiatic Libya. You have the Libya that goes across the northern portion of Africa. And you have another section that also comes down into a portion of Africa that was all entitled Libya. Now, the Gahan, that name, still retained even to this day in the Arabic. It came from an ancient term, which is the same term they use in the Greek, mind you, which is also Gahan, which means crazy river. That river, in the Greek terminology, where it's quite recognizable, is the Oxus River. That riverbed flows up through what? The lands of Cush. But you got to realize that Cush does not just cover one group of people. It never has. All the ancient texts that go back, dating back to at least 2000 BC, named that region over in the Asiatic steppes as being Cush. It always has done that. So now that we can slide one of the rivers into its proper place because it was not going in and floating along that area where they're trying to tell you that it came up by Ethiopia. That's never been the case. So what does that mean? That our location that we have come to understand and attribute to being Eden, I have more than enough evidence now to say no, that needs to be moved. How do we further back this up? Josephus said the same thing The book of Enoch in chapter 32, and if you go through all the verses prior to that on top of it, also points out that Eden was to the north and just a slight bit east. It's in the same region that we keep talking about where these vulture shamans are going to be found. Okay, we're only referring to one place, and that's the Altai Mountains. The Altai Mountains has all of the trees that are listed. When you look at Ezekiel 31, when you look at the other portions of those trees outside of the cedars of Lebanon, there's other references in the Bible to other cedars. Okay, folks, let's take it a little further. Frankincense and myrrh. Arabia was not the only place that ever came from. Okay, India has always been known for that. We've got the Ophir. Okay, everybody, that's from the Egyptian term Sophara, which means India. When we have one little piece of data that's throwing off how all of this works, it's going to throw in a complete mess of confusion. Now, was Aaron correct in bringing up this border with the Jordan, with the Red Sea, and everything going through that section, going up into the side of Israel? Of course it would be. Why? That would be the left-hand portion, because what? Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, is at the center of the earth. So now we can take a triangle and draw a nice little picture, realizing, because Matthew's shown you the coordinates for where the North Pole is going to be over 1 billion times. The ones that are pointed to Eden being in the spot where I had thought and assumed it was, I have no issue with their work. There's nothing wrong with that. But we have a plethora of new data that has come forward from the historical and archaeological finds. And I'm sorry, but when I see that kind of evidence and that kind of data, I'm going to reevaluate everything, and I'm going to look at all of it as a whole.
Well, Brian, this is a simple case that people just refuse. They refuse to understand that you can't contain God's words in one language. That's why he's always spoken out of two sides of his mouth. He has to. We have to remember that even the mother of the sons of thunder knew this. She knew that. Let one of them sit at your right and one at your left. And he's like, you have no clue what you're talking about. You have no clue what you're asking. But ladies and gentlemen, you look at the Greek, it's not enunciated Ethiopia. It's Ethiopia. So, ladies and gentlemen, if the historical evidence says that there was a Libya in the northern portion of Egypt, but they were separated by two different localities, what's God going to do? I've proven it to you with the Bible source code 100,000 times. He'll tell you one place in Hebrew and he'll tell you the other place in Greek. He has to. Ladies and gentlemen, you can go through all kinds of ancient Greek texts and plainly see that Ethiopia was nowhere remotely close to where all the academic theologians tell you it is. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, they don't want you seeing the Septuagint. They can't have you looking at that. Now, I understand that for the little ones, that's how God gave us our Bibles. I understand that. He gave us the Hebrew for the old and the Greek for the new in modern times. And that is good for spreading the gospel all over the planet. Because, ladies and gentlemen, when you go to Nigeria, okay, ladies and gentlemen, they don't enunciate anything the way we do. They're going to have enough trouble with just the basics, and that's what the basics is, the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament. And that's beautiful to do that for the little ones. and that expedites the force, the velocity of the spreading of the gospel, people translating it. Do you realize that if we was to provide all of these missionaries over the decades vast that have labored unto death, right now, those Bible translators that went to, Zimbabwe and they went to Haiti, they're at the altar in heaven right now. And can you just imagine if they were having to translate the entire Bible source code? It never would have got done. So I understand that. And I accept that. And I see the beauty in it. Because even as the sons of thunder, they were not the same. There had to be one on the left, one on the right. So it's very beautiful to God do it that way, to let us know that there is first the Jew, then the Gentile. And I am quite happy that he chose to do it that way, that the law would be ascribed to the Jew. So the Old Testament, everybody on this planet, Russians, everybody, had it translated, their Old Testament from the Hebrew, and that's a beautiful thing. And the other side, the New Testament, he's left for the Gentiles, the rest of us. That's a beautiful thing, and understand that he did that to show you through shadow and silhouette that the bride is a bride wearing a wedding dress of many colors. And that's a beautiful thing. But ladies and gentlemen, that doesn't mean that you're not supposed to grow up. It doesn't mean that you're not supposed to graduate from milk to solid meat. I know this is confusing to you. You've never heard anyone argue for both the Hebrew and the Greek. I know that. Believe me, I've been doing my research since I went to an institution of higher learning. Nobody. They will either fight for the Greek or fight for the Hebrew and get lost in between. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you realize everything God had to say today. The first broadcast of the Tribulation Trigger was covered entirely in Hebrew. My son covered a whole bunch of Greek today. That's a beautiful thing. It was the key for the Bri and I to cover the simple fact that, ladies and gentlemen, when the history books tell you that in Ethiopia was not in Africa, the Bible's not lying to you. It's just you was only catching it in the Hebrew. And they did go there. We've got archaeological evidence that they were. But that's not where they came from. So, what a beautiful thing. What a beautiful thing. Well, Aaron, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or are you ready to sign off, buddy?
I'm all out. It was good talking to you guys.
I hear you, buddy. I know it's awful late, which means it's 1 o'clock, son. So, your mom's going to be all over me tomorrow. So, go ahead and say goodnight to everybody, and then go ahead and shut your camera off, and you can hang up, bud. Me and Bri will finish this up.
See you guys. It was nice doing Bible study with you and sharing all that I did. And hearing all that you guys shared. Well, see y'all. Good night.
Good night. Always a pleasure, Aaron. Anytime.
Bri, did you have anything further you wanted to add?
But I have some stuff to put in here yet. So,
hey, very good.
I might as well, because here, look, I need to explain this before we go, folks, because I just dropped a megaton warhead on everyone. Okay, and I'm sure people are not going to like what it is that I just brought up, but let's let's stop here and consider Isaiah 18. Alas, O land of whirring wings, which lies beyond the rivers of Cush. Okay, we're going to stop right there for 2 seconds. Now, your little side note right here is going to say, or Ethiopia. Well, they're going to point that out because they're looking at the Greek. As I had stated before, since ancient times, over in that portion of the world, all the people that inhabited going down into India and up through a certain swath of geographical locations, it had always been known as the land of Cush. And as you look at Isaiah 18, it's going to amplify itself even more. Which sends envoys by the sea, even in papyrus vessels on the surface of the waters. Everybody, I would advise going out there and looking at what happened with Alexander and when he was sending little tiny vessels along the water that were made out of, it's right there. Okay. Go, swift messengers, to a nation, tall and smooth, to a people feared far and wide, a powerful and oppressive nation. Now, what does it say right here? Whose land the rivers divide. All you inhabitants of the world, dwellers on earth, as soon as a standard is raised on the mountains, you will see it. And as soon as the trumpet is blown, you will hear it. For thus says the Lord God has told me. For thus the Lord has told me, I will look from my dwelling place quietly, like dazzling heat in the sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. For before the harvest, as soon as the bud blossoms and the flower becomes a ripening grape, then he will cut off the sprigs with pruning knives, and remove and cut away the spreading branches. They will be left together for mountain birds of prey, and for the beasts of the earth. And the birds of prey will spend the summer feeding on them, and all the beasts of the earth will spend harvest time on them. At that time, a gift of homage will be brought to the Lord of hosts, from a people tall and smooth, even from a people feared far and wide, a powerful and oppressive nation, whose land the rivers divide, to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts, even Mount Zion. Now, everybody, I'm going to point out something crucial here. Everybody does understand that the book of Isaiah was written far earlier than when Herodotus used that exact Greek term for Ethiopia, referring to these tall, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed people. The translators of the Septuagint use that word on purpose. But in order to understand what is being spoken of here in Isaiah 18, you had to track down where that term was coming from in that specific spelling. To understand why they use that exact spelling, you had to go look at the ancient texts that exact spelling came up in. That word, on top of it, Ethiopia, with all of its roots, with every little portion that's tied into that Greek word, it's also pointing you straight at, and I've spoken about this a few times now, it's telling you to look to the amount of assembly. And I'll let Matthew come in here because he can tell you what that last portion of that word also brings into the equation as well.
Yes, sir, will. You'll take note, ladies and gentlemen, that it didn't mention Mount Zion, did it? That's not what it said. When you look at it, it said even Mount Zion, or to Mount Zion. Ladies and gentlemen, making sure that you understood the differentiation of what he was talking about. And as a matter of fact, the place that he described thoroughly I'm pretty sure that I've looked at on Google Earth. It describes to a T what he described, but I'll tell you what gets me. Ladies and gentlemen, please do go to Northern Africa. And will you please explain to me where there's mountain birds of prey? I'm going to tell you something else. There is one place that is world renowned for this very thing. They are not only known for hunting with the mountain birds of prey, they do so on horseback and hunt with bow. And under such auspices, who could possibly stand before them? So, ladies and gentlemen, just take note everything that was just mentioned. And Brian is quite correct. When you read this into Hebrew, it doesn't say Ethiopia here in verse 1. If you're reading from any of the Bibles that you could probably get a hold of, it's going to do what I said before. You're going to get the Hebrew, and that's okay. That's okay. But, ladies and gentlemen, where are the mountain birds of prey in any of Northern Africa? There's not. Brian pointed out, what about the papyrus boats? Sorry. Not in Northern Africa, not anywhere remotely close to it. And one thing's for sure, that he made sure to tell you multiple times that the people feared far and wide, powerful, oppressive. Ladies and gentlemen, he's not talking about anybody from Northern Africa. Go to your history books and look it up. Oh, that'll tell you. That'll tell you right now. That'll tell you right now. And I like verse 7. At that time, a gift of homage will be brought. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to go back and watch the flail of God and the scourge of God and the wings of the north. Only those people were known for extortion. You could pay them and they wouldn't smash you like a bug, because everybody knew that's exactly what God had designed them for. So these references here to far and wide, just, ladies and gentlemen, after the great day he who sits upon the throne, the dimensions of this planet's going to change. That's what he just said. If you could see it. You see, because the parallel apocalypse in the first chapter tells you emphatically in the Hebrew that the earth is going to come apart at the seams. That's exactly what it says. It creates a compound word using the Hebrew word for seams. That's, of course, the fault lines along the tectonic plates. If God did not do this ahead of time, ladies and gentlemen, this planet would explode when it ingested the power of his presence impacting Mount Paran, just like he said. We would explode. This is why we got to go through the birth pains. This is why there's got to be earthquakes in diverse places. What he's doing is he's freeing up those fault zones, and you're getting that now with all those great big sinkholes. You see, ladies and gentlemen, when you take a sphere and you make it bigger, okay, guess what happened? You create voids, ladies and gentlemen. You should know this, of course, in the parallel apocalypse, chapter 1. In the Greek, of course, God calls the earth a gyro. You're supposed to know he said that for a reason. Of course, gyro's not in these Strongs because that word is not used in the Greek New Testament, so you can't see it. But ladies and gentlemen, that's what those sinkholes are about. We're expanding. One side of our core is already starting to crystallize. We know that beyond any shadow of doubt. That's a fact. I'm telling you a fact. They released that to the general public, I think, in 2011. Brian and I showed it to you, gave you the video. So look that up. That's what's causing the sinkholes. It's voids as we stretch. It's creating spherical shafts. It's just physics. It's just standard textbook, schoolroom physics. If God didn't do this beforehand, if there weren't earthquakes in diverse places beforehand, when he impacted us, we would simply fly apart. He's not trying to kill us. So, with this in mind, I hope over the past couple of episodes you've realized why God says what he says. It's all important. To realize why the Tower of Babel was not allowed to be completed. The reason why Abimelech was not permitted to extenuate that Tower of Shechem over all of Israel. He was stopped dead in his tracks by the Assyrian. In league with, of course, 4 groups. You've heard me say this for years now. You just couldn't see it all. But I think by now you've gotten a whole lot of information. Everything I've said has always said the exact same thing. I've never changed my tune, nor do I even know how to. The New World Order never was ordained. The Assyrian stops it. So, with that, Bri, do you have more you'd like to add?
You know, I know everybody, I was in the same place because the data lined up, it made sense at the time. With the area around South Lake Van and so forth as being that geographical location. New data's come forward. New archaeological finds have come forward that are painting a much different picture than all of what it is that we had assumed for so very long to be the case. The new archaeological finds that have come forth in the last 20 years, even with Russia on top of it releasing all of their archaeological data that they've been collecting for a long time. Now that they've started allowing that stuff to be released into the public eye, allowing it to be translated into English, we're starting to get a lot of the missing details. Okay, we can even look concerning with Cain and Abel. And when Cain went out, you know, in the archaeological circles, they'll take you through the various societies, and they start with the the Paleolithic when they started with the stone. But we know emphatically on top of it that in a very short time, Cain and those through him, they became massively talented metalsmiths. And we see, and even it stretched back after the time of the flood, that the most impressive metalsmiths on the face of the planet, the most advanced, were coming from that steppe region. The horses that they were obtaining in all these other nations. When you go down into Assyria, the Akkadian Empire, taking it back into all those, with the very chariots and so forth that were coming up, those horses were all coming from the steppes. All of these things were brought forth from the steppes. You have this city that they have found, as I brought up last night, has got this Proto-Sumerian script. This was in the steppe region. This was the mega civilization that was there previous to this, where that Sumerian script actually came from. So those Sumerian people did not show up there until after they departed from that geographical location in Middle Asia. So this changes our understanding considerably. You know, there's the Megalithomania group. They do a set of seminars every year. They get together, and there's a whole bunch of different speakers. And there was one that I located that was back in, I believe it was probably 2009, where they go into extensive detail about this. Arthur has been, I have to love Arthur, as Matthew calls him, the Mad Russian. I have to love the boy because he pointed that place out to me years back, and I had completely forgotten all about it. And then he brought it up again a couple of weeks ago in some private discussions the two of us have been having, because we've really been talking about all of this stuff concerning the Altai Mountains, the things going on within the Ural Mountains. You know, so when I roll forward and I watch a documentary last week where they come in and reveal all this material that's been found in this city, this ancient Sumerian script, and for the second half of the presentation, there's a woman that's she's an expert in ancient religions. And I mean, some of the stuff she says, you know, you kind of have to swallow it and digest it to get where she's coming from. Because, you know, obviously when you're explaining these things, a lot of the terminology is going to remind you of like, you know, kind of a new age type thing. But if you really sit back and pay attention to what she's saying, she's not really relaying new age material. What she's doing is using a terminology in which we can understand. And she goes on to speaking about how these shamanistic religions, their roots, why it is that they did various aspects of what they did, and how heavy of an influence and effect that it had on the varied other religions, the varied polytheistic nations and so forth in ancient times, how it spread forth from this very civilization. And look, I've told you time and time and time again, your original shamans, anybody that knows anything about the study of the quote-unquote shamans that became popular again once we had this neo-paganism flare up, and, you know, all these new variants within occultism that really got rolling even heavier in the 80s, anybody that was studying that stuff back then, they already knew emphatically, if you want to know the root of shamanism, you go to Siberia. This is common knowledge, everybody. Okay, so what this woman was doing was she was explaining all these pieces in this presentation. She was telling you that very same thing. The core of all of these religions that sprung out following after all these different deities, all these different gods, all these different hosts of the heaven. Explicitly, she tells you, between both of the presenters, they explicitly tell you, they show you the evidence, and they say, look, this is the cradle. This is the cradle. This is where it all began. So, with that said, it's like I pointed out when I came in after Matthew finished. When I see that amount of actual evidence, data supporting it, archaeological finds supporting it, I'm going to look at that evidence and I'm going to reconsider my previous stance. Because the evidence itself, taking it in with what we just said from Isaiah 18, it's all one and the same, everyone.
Well, Brian, we certainly have had a bang-up show tonight, haven't we? It's absolutely off the charts, the amount of information that we've covered here today, ladies and gentlemen. It's just absolutely off the charts. So, I want to leave everybody with this. Believe God's word, it's true. Get your hands on the Bible source code. Hebrew is the Masoretic text with the Delitzsch New Testament. The Greek is the Septuagint coupled with the Edita Regia. Get it. Hide it in your heart. You're going to have to bank on it soon enough. If this has edified you in any way, then please like, share, and subscribe. In doing so, I pray that the Lord, our God, bless you. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, God bless. Godspeed.